What becomes of a warrior when the war is over? Some fade into the quiet comfort of the life they fought to protect. They trade their rifle for a hammer, their helmet for a hard hat, and the deafening roar of battle for the gentle murmur of a family dinner table. They melt back into the fabric of the nation, their scars hidden, their stories reserved for quiet nights and the knowing company of their brothers. Others are not so fortunate. For them, the war never truly ends. It follows them home, a spectre in the rearview mirror, a ghost at the foot of the bed. The silence of the civilian world is more deafening than any explosion. The peace they secured for others feels like a foreign country, one where they are an unwelcome immigrant, their language of violence and vigilance no longer understood. They are adrift, haunted by the faces of the fallen, shackled by a purpose that has been stripped from them. They seek not comfort, but stillness. Not peace, but a quiet that can finally drown out the echoes of the guns. Jack Corrigan was one of the latter. Built of granite and grief, he moved through the world like a phantom limb of the American military machine. 6'3", 230 pounds of densely packed muscle, he was a former Marine Force Recon operator, a Tier 1 asset whose operational history was a tapestry of redacted ink and hushed whispers in the halls of power. His eyes, the color of a winter sky over the ocean, had seen too much. They held a chilling stillness, the look of a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back with his own reflection. His purpose had been forged in the crucible of combat, his life defined by the mission, the team, the unwavering code of the Recon Marine. Protect the man to your left. Protect the man to your right. Complete the objective. Come home. But he had failed the last part. Not for himself, but for his best friend, Sergeant Marcus Thorne, who had come home under the star-spangled drape of a flag. The loss had hollowed Jack out, leaving a crater where his soul used to be. The Corps had honorably discharged him, citing wounds not visible on any X-ray. Post-traumatic stress. A clinical, sterile term for a man being eaten alive by his own memories. So he sought the silence. He found it, or a version of it, in a small, isolated cabin nestled deep within the rugged mountains of Montana. The peaks stood like stone sentinels, their silence ancient and absolute. Here, the only orders came from the changing of the seasons. The only enemy was the biting wind or the heavy snow. He spent his days chopping wood, maintaining his aging truck, and running the trails that snaked through the dense pine forests. It was a war of attrition against his own mind, a deliberate, exhausting routine designed to leave no room for the ghosts to whisper. He was not entirely alone. At his side, a constant shadow, was Havoc. Havoc was a massive German shepherd, a retired multipurpose canine from the same elite command. Like Jack, he was a veteran. His sleek black and tan coat was cross-hatched with old scars, a roadmap of a violent past. A puckered white line traced the side of his muzzle from a close call with a blade in some forgotten corner of the world. He walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp in his left hind leg, a souvenir from an IED blast that had earned his first handler a Purple Heart and a trip home. Havoc had been deemed too aggressive, too traumatized for reassignment. They were going to put him down. Jack had heard about it through the grapevine of the veteran network. He drove 12 hours straight to the base kennel, his jaw set like concrete. He didn't plead or negotiate. He stood before the kennel master, a silent, immovable object, and produced Havoc's complete service and medical records, which he had obtained through channels best left unquestioned. He pointed to a specific commendation, a single line in a thick file that detailed how the dog had dragged a wounded Marine from a burning vehicle under heavy fire. That Marine had been Jack Corrigan. There was no argument after that. The paperwork was signed. Jack walked to Havoc's cage. The dog was coiled in the back, a low, menacing growl vibrating in his chest, his eyes burning with suspicion and fear. Jack didn't speak. He simply sat on the concrete floor, leaned his back against the chain link, and waited. For 3 hours, he sat there, a silent vigil, until the growling subsided, replaced by a questioning whine. Finally, the massive dog uncoiled, moved slowly forward, and pushed his cold, wet nose through the fence into Jack's waiting hand. A treaty was signed. A brotherhood reforged. Now, the man and the dog were two halves of a single, broken whole. They shared the same silence, the same ghosts. Havoc was more than a pet, he was a fire watch, a living, breathing early warning system for the ambushes that lay in wait within Jack's own mind. When the nightmares came, and Jack awoke in a cold sweat, gasping for air, Havoc would be there, his heavy head resting on Jack's chest, his warm presence an anchor in the storm of memory. He was the keeper of Jack's six, the last remaining member of his fire team. Their existence was a fragile truce with the world. A Spartan routine. A shared solitude. It was not peace, but it was the closest thing to it Jack had known since the sand and the blood. But the world has a way of finding its warriors, no matter how far they run. The war always finds a new front. 80 miles away, in a small, forgotten town huddled in the valley below the mountains, another warrior was fighting his own last stand. Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, United States Marine Corps, retired, was cold. It was a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the late autumn chill seeping through the cracked window panes of his small, dilapidated house. It was the cold of poverty, of neglect, of a nation's forgotten promise. The threadbare blanket pulled up to his chin did little to stop the shivering that racked his frail, 89-year-old frame. His house, once a proud symbol of a life's work, was now a crumbling testament to his decline. The paint peeled from the clapboard siding like sunburnt skin. The porch sagged. The small yard was a tangle of weeds. Inside, the story was the same. The heat had been turned off 2 weeks ago. He was making do with a small, sputtering space heater that smelled of burning dust, but it was a losing battle against the encroaching Montana winter. He stared at the far wall of his living room, his pale blue eyes, cloudy with age but still holding a flicker of their old fire, fixed on the display case that held the artifacts of a different life. There was the flag, folded into a tight, perfect triangle. There were the medals, tarnished but proud. The Silver Star. The Bronze Star with a V for Valor. And there, in the center, on a bed of faded blue velvet, was the Medal of Honor. He had earned it on a frozen hill in Korea that the maps had called Chosin. He and his platoon, out of ammo, out of time, had fixed bayonets and charged into a human wave of enemy soldiers, a desperate, suicidal act of defiance that had somehow broken the enemy's assault and saved the rest of their company from being overrun. He had been 21 years old. He had been invincible. Now, his greatest enemy was a stack of papers on his kitchen table. Foreclosure notices. Overdue bills. Letters written in a dense, incomprehensible legalese that all said the same thing: he was losing his home. It had started subtly. A nice young man in a sharp suit from a company called Vance Financial Solutions had appeared at his door a year ago. He had talked about reverse mortgages, about accessing the equity in his home to help with his rising medical bills. He had been respectful, charming, calling Elias Sergeant Major, and speaking of his own deep respect for the military. Elias, a man from a generation where a handshake was a binding contract, had trusted him. He had signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly from the arthritis that had twisted his fingers into knots. The initial checks had been a godsend. He'd been able to afford his prescriptions, to fix the leaky roof, to feel a sense of security for the first time in years. But then the terms had shifted. The interest rates, buried in the fine print he couldn't read without a magnifying glass, had ballooned. The payments he was supposed to receive had stopped, replaced by demands for money he did not have. The nice young man no longer answered his calls. Now, this. The final notice. An eviction date circled in red. A knock at the door made him jump. It was a sharp, impatient sound. He knew who it would be. He had been dreading this moment. Slowly, painfully, he swung his legs off the worn sofa, his joints screaming in protest. He shuffled to the door, his hand shaking as he reached for the knob. Standing on his sagging porch were two men. One was a burly man in a sheriff's department uniform, his face set in a look of professional neutrality. The other was a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. He was wearing the uniform of a first lieutenant in the United States Army, the gold bar on his collar gleaming in the flat, gray light. But there was something wrong. The uniform was too crisp, the posture too rigid, as if he were playing a role. He held a clipboard like a weapon. Elias Thorne, the lieutenant asked, his voice sharp and devoid of warmth. I'm Sergeant Major Thorne, Elias corrected him, his own voice a dry rasp. The title was all he had left. The lieutenant, whose name tag read Davies, gave a dismissive smirk. Right. We're here to execute a lawful eviction order. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises with your personal belongings. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. But there must be some mistake. I'm a veteran. We're aware, Davies cut in, his tone dripping with condescension. Vance Financial has a veteran outreach program, but there are certain eligibility requirements. Frankly, your file is a little thin. We're going to need to see your service record. Your DD 214. Proof of your commendations. All of it. We need to verify your story. Demand his service record. The words struck Elias harder than any physical blow. To question his honor, his history, the very fabric of his life, was a desecration. It was like asking a priest for proof that he believed in God. My record? Elias stammered, a hot flush of shame and anger rising in his chest. You want to see my record? That's the procedure, Davies said, tapping his pen on the clipboard. Unless you can produce the documentation proving your status and eligibility for debt forgiveness under the program, the eviction stands. The clock is ticking, Sergeant Major. The sarcasm in his voice was a deliberate twist of the knife. Elias felt a wave of dizziness. He leaned against the doorframe, the cold of the wood seeping into his thin shirt. He looked past the arrogant young officer, past the impassive sheriff's deputy, to the street. He saw his neighbor's curtains twitch. The whole world was watching his final, pathetic humiliation. He had faced down machine gun nests and artillery barrages, had held the line against impossible odds, only to be defeated by a boy in a costume and a stack of paper. The cold inside him deepened, an icy despair that threatened to extinguish the last flickering embers of his fighting spirit. He had nowhere to go. No one to call. He was alone. The war had finally come home, and this time, he was going to lose. Jack needed supplies. The first snow of the season was predicted for the weekend, a heavy fall that would likely make the winding dirt road from his cabin impassable for days, if not weeks. His ritual was always the same. Once a month, he and Havoc would drive the 90 minutes into the valley town of Harmony Creek for fuel, food, and the few other necessities their Spartan life required. He hated it. The town was a cacophony of noise and people that grated on his nerves. The forced smiles of cashiers, the chatter of shoppers, the mundane rhythm of civilian life, it all felt like a badly rehearsed play. He moved through it like a ghost, his gaze distant, his presence a silent, heavy weight that made people unconsciously give him a wide berth. Havoc sat in the passenger seat of the beat-up Ford F-250, his massive head framed in the window, his intelligent eyes scanning the passing scenery. He was calm, but alert, a coiled spring of potential energy. He was always this way in town, sensing Jack's unease, mirroring his master's quiet vigilance. As they rumbled down the main street, a flash of officialdom caught Jack's eye. A sheriff's car was parked haphazardly in front of a small, rundown house. It wasn't the car that held his attention, but the man standing on the porch next to the deputy. He was wearing an army officer's uniform. Jack's eyes, trained to spot every detail, every inconsistency, narrowed instantly. Something was wrong. The uniform was immaculate, a freshly pressed Class A uniform, which was utterly inappropriate for what appeared to be a civil matter on a weekday morning. The ribbons on his chest were slightly out of alignment. His posture was a caricature of military bearing, too stiff, too theatrical. He looked like an actor playing a soldier. Then Jack saw the old man in the doorway. Frail, trembling, clutching the doorframe for support. There was a quiet dignity in the old man's stance, a ghost of a ramrod straightness that even age and infirmity could not completely erase. Jack had seen that posture before, in grizzled gunnery sergeants and old-school commandants. It was the bearing of a lifer, a man whose identity was forged in the crucible of the Corps. Suddenly, Havoc, who had been resting his head on the open window, went rigid. A low growl, more a vibration than a sound, rumbled deep in his chest. His ears flattened, and his gaze locked onto the scene on the porch. He shifted his weight, planting his front paws firmly on the dashboard, assuming what Jack's team had called the vanguard stance, a posture of protective aggression. Jack trusted the dog's instincts more than his own. Havoc could smell deceit, could sense malice, the way a predator smells fear. He pulled the truck over to the opposite curb, 100 feet down the street, and killed the engine. The abrupt silence was heavy. He watched, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He saw the young officer, Davies, tap his clipboard with an air of smug impatience. He saw the old man flinch, his face a mask of anguish and shame. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a foul taste in the back of his throat. A wolf in a soldier's uniform, preying on an old sheep. The world was full of such predators. Jack had spent his life hunting a different kind, but he recognized the breed. The bully. The coward who cloaks himself in false authority to dominate the weak. He saw Davies say something that made the old man recoil. He saw the deputy shift his weight, his hand moving closer to his sidearm, a sign of escalating tension. Enough. The decision was not a conscious thought. It was an instinct, a reflex honed by years of seeing a threat and moving to neutralize it. The mission parameters were clear: protect the vulnerable, eliminate the threat. Stay, he commanded Havoc. The single word was low and absolute. Havoc whined, his eyes still locked on the porch, but he obeyed, sinking back into the seat. He knew the command. He knew what it meant. Jack got out of the truck. He didn't slam the door, the latch clicked into place with a quiet, final sound. He moved with a predatory grace that belied his size, his boots making no sound on the cracked pavement as he crossed the street. He didn't approach the porch directly but came at an angle, using the deputy's own vehicle as a blind spot until the last possible moment. The deputy saw him first. The officer's eyes widened slightly at the sudden appearance of this massive, imposing figure. He instinctively took a half step back, his hand dropping away from his weapon. He recognized a threat level that was far beyond his pay grade. Lieutenant Davies was still focused on the old man, enjoying his power trip. "Look, old man, it's simple. Show us the papers, or get out of the house. I don't have all day." "That's enough." Jack's voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a shard of ice. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, a voice that carried the weight of command and the promise of swift, decisive violence. Davies spun around, his face a mask of irritation. "Who the hell are you? This is official business." Jack came to a stop at the bottom of the 3 short steps leading to the porch. He stood between Davies and the old man, a human wall. He didn't look at the deputy. He didn't look at the old man. His cold, flat gaze was locked entirely on Davies. He let the silence stretch, using it as a weapon. He scanned the younger man from head to toe, his eyes lingering on the misaligned ribbons, the pristine uniform, the soft, uncalloused hands. "You know, officer," Jack stated. It wasn't an accusation, it was a simple statement of fact. "Your ribbon rack is a mess. You're wearing Class A's for a civil eviction on a Tuesday. You're a fraud." Davies's face flushed a blotchy red. The arrogance in his eyes flickered, replaced by a spark of fear. I am a first lieutenant in the United States Army Reserve, attached to a community liaison program. Now, identify yourself or I'll have you arrested for interfering with a federal matter." He tried to puff out his chest, to reclaim his authority, but his voice cracked slightly. Jack took one slow step up onto the porch. He was now on the same level as Davies, his sheer size and proximity crowding the younger man, stealing his air. The scent of cheap cologne and fear radiated from him. There is no federal program that uses junior officers in dress uniform to serve eviction notices alongside a county sheriff, Jack said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You're a bottom feeder in a stolen suit of honor. You're using that uniform to intimidate an old man. A Marine." He flicked his eyes for a fraction of a second toward Elias Thorne, a glance of acknowledgement, of solidarity. In that moment, Elias saw it. He saw the warrior beneath the civilian clothes, the unmistakable bearing of an elite combatant. A flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt in years, ignited within him. "I'm warning you," Davies squeaked, taking a step back and bumping into the porch railing. "Sheriff, do something." The deputy, who had been watching the entire exchange with a growing sense of dread, held up his hands. "Sir," he said to Jack, his voice cautious. "This is a civil matter. I'm just here to keep the peace." He clearly wanted no part of what was about to happen. He recognized that Jack was not a man to be trifled with, and his own instincts were screaming that this entire situation was wrong. Jack's focus never left Davies. "You want to see his service record?" Jack's voice was a steel vice. "Fine. Let's see yours first. What unit are you with, Lieutenant? What's your MOS? Who's your CO?" The rapid-fire questions, basic knowledge for any real soldier, hit Davies like a volley of blows. He stammered, his eyes darting around wildly, looking for an escape. I don't have to answer to you." "No? You don't," Jack agreed, a cold, shark-like smile touching his lips for a fraction of a second. It didn't reach his eyes. "You have to answer to United States Code Title 18, Section 912. Impersonating a federal officer. And Title 18, Section 704. The Stolen Valor Act. Both are felonies. You're going to spend a long time in a very small room explaining why you're wearing a uniform you never earned." The color drained completely from Davies's face. He was trapped. The legal jargon, delivered with such cold certainty, shattered the last of his composure. Jack took another step forward. Davies flinched back so hard he almost tumbled over the railing. "Walk away now," Jack commanded, his voice a low, final order. "Get in your car. Drive away. Forget this address. Forget this man's name. If I ever see you, or anyone else from your company, near him again, the next conversation we have will be with federal marshals. Do you understand me?" Davies could only nod, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Go," Jack said. Davies didn't need to be told twice. He practically scrambled off the porch, fumbling his clipboard and papers, which scattered across the neglected lawn. He didn't stop to pick them up. He scurried to a late-model sedan parked down the street, the kind of blandly expensive car a mid-level salesman would drive. He threw himself inside and sped away, his tires squealing in protest. Jack watched him go, his body still coiled with tension. Only when the car was out of sight did he seem to relax, the hard lines of his shoulders softening slightly. He turned to the deputy, who was staring at him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The civil matter is concluded," Jack said. "You can go." The deputy nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He glanced at the old man, who was now standing a little straighter, then back at Jack. "Thank you," he said quietly, before turning and walking back to his patrol car. He too drove away, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Jack was alone on the porch with the old Marine. He finally turned to face him fully. The anger in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet concern. He saw the faint tear tracks on the old man's weathered cheeks. He saw the trembling in his hands. "Are you all right, Sergeant Major?" Jack asked, his voice now gentle. Elias Thorne looked at the massive man standing before him, his protector, his unlikely savior. He felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He hadn't been shown this kind of respect, this kind of fierce, protective loyalty, since he'd taken off his own uniform for the last time. He straightened his shoulders, pulling on the last reserves of his strength and dignity. "I am now, son," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am now." Jack gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He bent down and began to gather the papers that Davies had dropped, his movements economical and precise. They were not just papers, they were evidence. The mission had just begun. He held the sheaf of documents in one hand, a collection of predatory loan agreements and threatening letters from Vance Financial Solutions. The cold fury that had propelled him to intervene was now settling into a hard, focused resolve. He looked from the papers to the old man, who seemed to shrink back into himself now that the immediate threat was gone, the adrenaline fading to reveal the deep chill of his reality. "You can't stay here," Jack said. It was a statement of fact, not a suggestion. "The heat is off. They'll be back." Elias sagged against the door frame. "I have nowhere else to go." "Yes, you do," Jack replied. He gestured with his head back toward his truck, parked down the street like a patient beast of burden. "You're coming with me." There was no room for argument in his tone. It was the voice of a man taking charge of a compromised situation, securing the asset. Elias, who had spent a lifetime giving and taking orders, recognized the sound of command. For the first time in a very long time, he felt the profound relief of being able to cede control to someone more capable. He gave a single, tired nod. "Let me get my medals," he whispered. Jack waited patiently as Elias shuffled back inside the cold, dark house. He returned a moment later, clutching the worn velvet-lined display case to his chest like a holy relic. It was the sum of his honor, the tangible proof of the life they had tried to denigrate. Jack took the case from him gently, handling it with a reverence that surprised the old man. "And one other thing," Elias said, his voice a little stronger. He pointed a gnarled finger toward a dusty, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It showed a group of young, grim-faced Marines in heavy winter gear, their faces smeared with dirt, their eyes ancient. "My boys," Elias said simply. "Can't leave them behind." Jack retrieved the photograph. He helped Elias navigate the treacherous porch steps and walked him slowly to the truck. He opened the passenger door. Havoc, who had been watching the entire proceeding with intense focus, whined softly and nudged the old man's hand with his nose as he settled into the seat, a gesture of acceptance and comfort. Jack placed the medal case and the photograph carefully on the seat between them, then went back to the house. He moved with purpose, performing a quick, final sweep. He shut off the sputtering space heater, a clear fire hazard. He locked the front door, a futile but symbolic gesture. As he walked back to the truck, he took one last look at the crumbling house, a monument to a forgotten promise. A new kind of anger, cold and methodical, began to burn within him. This was not just about one man. This was a desecration. The drive back to the cabin was made mostly in silence. Elias seemed to be in a state of shock, his gaze distant. Jack let the silence be, knowing the old man needed time to process the day's whiplash of events. When they finally arrived, the sun was beginning to dip below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Jack led Elias inside the Spartan cabin. It was a single room, dominated by a large stone fireplace where a low fire was already burning, casting a warm, welcoming glow. There was a small kitchenette, a table, and two simple wooden chairs. A cot was neatly made in one corner, and a larger sleeping bag and mat, Havoc's bed, was in another. It was the home of a man who owned little and wanted less. "Sit," Jack said, guiding Elias to the chair closest to the fire. He draped a thick wool blanket over the old man's shoulders. Havoc, without being told, padded over and lay down at Elias's feet, his body a warm, solid presence. The old Marine's trembling hand fell unconsciously to rest on the dog's massive head. Jack moved to the kitchenette and prepared 2 mugs of instant coffee, strong and black. He set one down on the small table beside Elias, then sat in the other chair, the sheaf of papers from Vance Financial in his hand. For a few minutes, they sat in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the low sigh of the wind outside. "That dog," Elias said finally, his voice raspy. "He's a warrior, I can see it." "He is," Jack confirmed. "Multipurpose canine, force recon. Name's Havoc." Elias nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. "Dogs and Marines. The 2 most loyal creatures God ever made," he stroked Havoc's head. "Thank you, son. For what you did back there. I haven't been treated with that kind of respect in a long time." "He disrespected the uniform," Jack said, his voice hard. "And he disrespected a Marine. That requires a correction." He looked down at the papers in his hand. "This company. Vance Financial. Tell me everything. Piece by piece, the sordid story came out. Elias recounted the visit from the charming young man, the promises of financial freedom, the confusing paperwork, and the eventual betrayal. He spoke of his dwindling pension, his wife's medical bills from years ago that had wiped out his savings, and the shame of having to ask for help. Jack listened without interruption, his expression unchanging, but a cold, hard knot was tightening in his gut. This was more than just a predatory loan. The use of a fake army officer, the specific demand for service records, it was a calculated, cruel strategy designed to exploit the very honor and discipline of its victims. They were targeting veterans, using their ingrained respect for authority and their pride against them. When Elias finished, Jack stood up and walked over to a small, steel footlocker in the corner of the room. He opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a sleek, heavily encrypted satellite phone and a laptop computer. It was his only link to the world he had left behind. He sat back down at the table and opened the laptop. It booted up with no branding, just a simple, text-based command prompt. He plugged in the satellite phone, the device whirring to life as it searched for a secure signal. "There's a man I need to call," Jack said, more to himself than to Elias. "He finds things." He typed a single, encrypted message into the console, Oracle. "Awake?" Less than a minute later, a reply blinked onto the screen. "For you, Ghost?" "Always." "What do you need?" Jack's call sign. "Ghost." A name whispered in fear by the enemy and in reverence by his brothers. A name he hadn't used since he'd left the world of shadows and steel. Jack began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced speed. He laid out the situation in clipped, precise sentences. Target, Vance Financial Solutions. Predatory lending scheme. Targeting elderly veterans. Confirmed actor, fake army LT, name Davies. Need full workup. Corporate structure, principles, assets. Expedite. He photographed the documents from Vance Financial with a small, high-resolution camera and uploaded the encrypted files. The reply came back almost instantly. On it. "Give me an hour. Something about this smells ripe. Stand by." Jack closed the laptop. The first move had been made. The hunter was now on the trail. He looked over at Elias, who had fallen into a light, exhausted sleep in the chair, his hands still resting on Havoc's head. The firelight played across the deep lines on his face, a roadmap of a long, hard life. On the table, the photograph of the young Marines at Chosin seemed to watch him, their expressions grim and determined. Jack felt the old, familiar feeling stirring in his chest. It was not anger, not anymore. It was something colder, purer. It was the righteous fury of the protector. He had a mission again. He had a charge to keep. And he would see it through to the end. The wolves had come for one of his own. Now, the wolf hunter was coming for them. An hour stretched into 2. The cabin was quiet, filled with the warmth of the fire and the soft sound of Elias's breathing. Jack did not rest. He sat at the table, disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling his SIG Sauer P226 with a fluid, unconscious efficiency. The familiar weight of the steel in his hands, the scent of the gun oil, the precise click of the parts seating together, it was a ritual, a form of meditation that focused his mind and calmed the storm within. Havoc lay by the fire, but he was not asleep. His eyes were open, tracking Jack's every movement. He could sense the shift in his master. The listless melancholy that had haunted their quiet life was gone, burned away by a new, cold fire. The warrior was back. Finally, the laptop chimed, a single, discreet tone. Jack set the pistol aside and opened the machine. A wall of text and data from Oracle filled the screen. "Ghost? You stepped in it. This is deep." Jack's eyes scanned the information rapidly, his mind processing the complex web of connections. Vance Financial Solutions was the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. It was a subsidiary of a larger holding company, the Argent Group, which was in turn owned by one man, Preston Vance. Vance's profile materialized on the screen. A photo showed a man in his late 50s with slicked-back silver hair, a smug, self-satisfied smile, and the cold, empty eyes of a shark. He was a real estate magnate and private equity predator with a history of hostile takeovers and asset stripping. He had a portfolio of shell corporations that crisscrossed the globe, a labyrinth designed to hide money and evade taxes. He was untouchable, wrapped in layers of lawyers and legal firewalls. But Oracle had dug deeper. Vance isn't just a vulture. He's a hyena. He's not just foreclosing on these vets. He's systematically acquiring their properties. I've cross-referenced the deeds with other veterans targeted by this scam. It's a pattern. He's buying up land. Specifically, land that borders decommissioned military installations. Jack's blood ran cold. This was no longer just about financial fraud. This was something else entirely. "WHY?" Jack typed back. "Still digging. But it gets weirder. The fake Lieutenant, Davies, isn't military. His name is Kevin Davies. A low-level sales manager for Vance. But he has a brother, a major in Army G2 intelligence. Potential access to sensitive databases. Databases that might contain lists of veterans with specific service histories or security clearances." The pieces began to click into place, forming a dark and disturbing picture. Vance wasn't just targeting any veterans. He was targeting specific veterans, likely those whose old homes were strategically located. The Stolen Valor Act was a tool, a psychological weapon to disorient and shame them into compliance. Jack looked over at Elias, asleep in the chair. He thought about the Medal of Honor, the battle at Chosin. A man like that would have been involved in more than just open combat. He would have held the highest clearances. He would have been part of operations that were still classified, even 70 years later. "Oracle," Jack typed. "Run a name." "Sergeant Major Elias Thorne. USMC. Medal of Honor, Korea." The reply was almost instantaneous. "Already did. Most of his file is standard-issue hero stuff. Chosin, the usual. But there's a deep file. Heavily redacted. One of those, if you're reading this, you're probably about to be visited by men in black suits files. It's linked to a single code name." A chill traced its way down Jack's spine. "What is it?" "Ghost 5. The words hung on the screen, seeming to pulse with a dark energy. Jack felt a jolt, a sense of profound and unsettling connection. His own call sign was Ghost. This was Ghost 5. It couldn't be a coincidence. "What is Ghost 5? "Don't know. It's a ghost, literally. A keyword that's buried so deep in the Pentagon's archived MAINF that pinging it requires a level of clearance I can't spoof. Not quickly, anyway. But I can see the digital tripwires around it. And someone else has been poking at it. Recently." Jack's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. Vance. Or rather, Vance's connection in Army G2. They weren't just after Elias's land. They were after something connected to his past. Something connected to Ghost 5. "Ghost 5, Jack whispered aloud. The sound of the word stirred Elias. The old man's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Jack, his gaze groggy but lucid. "What did you say?" Elias asked. "Ghost 5, Jack repeated, his eyes locked on the old Marine. "What is it, Sergeant Major?" Elias Thorne went rigid. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pale, waxy gray. He stared at Jack, his eyes wide with a fear that was 70 years old. It was a terror that had nothing to do with foreclosure or poverty, but with something far darker, a secret he had carried buried in his soul for a lifetime. "Where did you hear that name?" he rasped, his voice trembling. "The people who are after your house are looking for it," Jack said simply. The revelation hit Elias like a physical blow. He sank back into the chair, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Oh, God," he whispered. "After all this time. I thought it was buried. I thought it was over." "What was over, Sergeant Major?" Jack pressed, his voice firm but not unkind. I need to know. To protect you, I need to know everything. Elias closed his eyes, his face a mask of anguish. It was as if a door to a long-sealed tomb had been forced open, releasing the ghosts of the past. It wasn't just Chosin, Elias began, his voice barely a whisper. After the main battle, things got complicated. We were behind enemy lines. A small unit of us. Recon guys, a few engineers. Our official mission was reconnaissance. But our real mission was different. He paused, swallowing hard. There was a cache. Something the Soviets had given the North Koreans. Not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was technology. Something new. Something they were testing. Our orders were to secure it or destroy it. We were Ghost 5. That was our call sign. Jack listened, his entire being focused. This was the heart of it. We found the cache, Elias continued, his eyes still closed, living the memory. It was in a cave, deep in the mountains. We were compromised on infiltration. It was a bloodbath. We fought our way in, and we fought our way out. We managed to destroy most of it, but I was the one who carried the asset out. The core component. It was small, no bigger than a briefcase. I didn't know what it was, only that it was the one thing we had to get back at all costs. His voice broke. I was the only one who made it back to friendly lines. The only one. They told me I was a hero. They gave me the medal for Chosin, to cover it. The official story was that my platoon was wiped out in a heroic last stand. The truth was that Ghost 5 never existed. They buried it. They buried my boys in unmarked graves and swore me to secrecy for the rest of my life. The laptop chimed again. Oracle. Ghost. I think I found it. Vance's land grab. It's not random. He's creating a buffer zone. Around a decommissioned site. Fort Kensington. Sound familiar? Jack's mind raced. Fort Kensington was a sprawling, abandoned Cold War-era base not 30 miles from Elias's house. It was a place of local legends and ghost stories, fenced off and forgotten. The fort was a research and development facility, Oracle's text continued. Top secret weaponry. Rumors of exotic tech. It was shuttered in the 70s. Everything was supposedly moved or destroyed. But what if IT wasn't? The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a battering ram. They didn't destroy the asset from Korea, Jack typed, his fingers flying. They studied it. At Fort Kensington. And Vance knows it's still there, Oracle replied. Holy. Ghost, my ping on Ghost 5 just lit up the entire Pentagon. I'm seeing cybercom alarms, NSA flags, the works. It's like I rattled the bars on a dragon's cage. They are freezing systems, locking down networks. Whatever Ghost 5 was, and whatever is at that fort, it's a national security nightmare. Vance isn't just trying to get rich. He's trying to steal a ghost. The full, terrifying scope of the situation was now clear. This was not about a house. It was about a hidden history, a piece of stolen, world-altering technology that had been dormant for 70 years. Vance was using his brother in G2 to pinpoint the location of the asset within the abandoned fort, and he was buying up the surrounding land to secure it, to provide a private, secluded area from which to launch his own illegal excavation and recovery operation. Elias Thorne was just a loose end, a living witness whose property was the final piece of the geographic puzzle. Jack looked at Elias. The old man was slumped in his chair, exhausted by his confession, the weight of his long-held secret finally released. He was not just a victim of fraud, he was the keeper of a key, the last living link to a secret that powerful men were willing to kill for. The mission had changed. The stakes had been raised from personal justice to national security. Jack stood up, the decision already made. The cold, righteous fury was now home to a razor's edge. Preston Vance had made a fatal mistake. He had woken the ghosts of the past. And in doing so, he had woken a ghost in the present. "Sergeant Major," Jack said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You're safe here with me. I'm going to finish this." He walked back to the table and picked up his pistol. He checked the magazine, the action smooth and practiced. He holstered the weapon at the small of his back, beneath his jacket. "Havoc," he said. The big dog was instantly on his feet, his tail giving a single, tight wag. He knew the tone. It was the same tone Jack used right before a mission, right before the controlled chaos was unleashed. Jack turned to his laptop. "Oracle. I'm going in. Send me everything you have on Preston Vance's personal location. Real time. And a schematic of his primary office building. I'm going to see him now." The reply was simple. "Sent. Go hunting, Ghost. I'll keep the digital wolves off your trail." Jack looked at Elias one last time. "Get some rest, Sergeant Major. When you wake up, this will all be over." He strode to the door, Havoc at his heel. He did not look back. The Protector was now the hunter. He was moving with purpose, a Tier 1 asset being deployed not by a nation, but by his own unshakable code. Preston Vance was about to learn a very hard lesson. Some men build their empires on greed. Others build them on violence. But the most dangerous men build them on the desecration of honor. And for that, there is always a reckoning. The night was cold and starless as Jack's F-250 devoured the highway mile separating his mountain sanctuary from the gleaming city where Preston Vance made his lair. Havoc sat in the passenger seat, a silent, watchful partner, his head cocked as if listening to something only he could hear. The GPS on Jack's satellite phone, displaying the schematics Oracle had sent, glowed in the darkness of the cab. Preston Vance's seat of power was not some secluded compound. That was for amateurs. Vance was a predator who hid in plain sight. His personal office occupied the entire top floor, the penthouse, of the Vance Tower, a 60-story monument to his own ego, a gleaming spear of glass and steel that pierced the heart of the city's financial district. It was a fortress of wealth and technology, protected by state-of-the-art security systems and a team of private contractors. To a civilian, it was impenetrable. To Jack, it was just another target environment. He parked the truck in a multi-story garage 3 blocks away, a deliberate choice to avoid associating his vehicle with the target building. He and Havoc exited the truck, melting into the late-night shadows of the city. The air, thick with exhaust fumes and the distant wail of sirens, was an assault on senses accustomed to the clean, quiet mountain. Jack moved with a fluid, purposeful stride, Havoc trotting silently at his left heel, a perfect military formation. They were ghosts in the urban jungle, 2 predators moving through a world of oblivious prey. Jack wore a simple, dark jacket, jeans, and boots. He carried no bag, nothing that would draw attention. He was just another man walking his dog, an image of civilian normalcy that was his most effective camouflage. He stopped across the street from the Vance Tower, shrouded in the darkness of a recessed storefront. He studied the building. The lobby was brightly lit, a cavern of marble and polished chrome. A single security guard sat at a massive, semicircular desk, his eyes glazed over as he stared at a bank of monitors. Oracle's intel was precise. The elevators required a keycard with penthouse-level clearance. The stairwells were alarmed and monitored by pressure plates and cameras. The only way up, short of a full-scale assault, was to bypass the system entirely. "Oracle. I'm on site. Talk to me about the elevators," Jack texted. "Maintenance override," the reply came. "Service elevator 4, in the rear corridor behind the main bank. It's the only one with a physical keys lock backup. Their security consultants were idiots. I can't juice the card reader remotely, but I can create a loop on the cameras in that hallway. You'll have a 90-second window once you're inside the service corridor. After that, the system will flag the anomaly." "Copy," Jack sent. "What about the penthouse itself?" "Vance likes his privacy. The penthouse is isolated. His personal elevator opens directly into his office foyer. Heavy door, magnetic lock. but he has a dog. A prissy little purebred he lets out on a private terrace. The terrace door is his weak point. Less sensor coverage. It's your way in. The plan solidified in Jack's mind. A simple, three-phase infiltration. Breach the ground floor. Ascend. Breach the penthouse. He had done it 100 times before in places far more hostile than this. He waited, watching the rhythm of the street. A cleaning crew finished their work in a neighboring building. A lone taxi sped by. The city was settling into its late-night slumber. "Let's go," he murmured to Havoc. They crossed the street, not directly toward the gleaming front entrance, but toward a darkened alley that ran alongside the building. It was filled with dumpsters and the stench of garbage. At the end of the alley was a steel fire exit door. It was locked, of course. Jack didn't hesitate. From a small pocket sewn into the lining of his jacket, he produced a small, flat piece of metal, a tension wrench, and a series of delicate picks. His hands, which had been wrapped around the stock of a rifle and the grip of a pistol, moved with the grace of a surgeon. There was a series of faint, almost inaudible clicks. In less than 10 seconds, the lock gave way. He pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, Havoc moving with him like a shadow. They were in a concrete stairwell that smelled of dust and stale air. According to the schematics, this stairwell connected to the service corridor on the ground floor. He sent the text, "Inside. Start the loop." "Loop is hot," Oracle replied. 90 seconds. Go. Jack opened the door to the ground floor. They were in a dimly lit hallway. Ahead, he could see the bank of service elevators. He moved quickly, his boots silent on the linoleum floor. He reached service elevator 4. As Oracle had said, there was a physical key slot next to the call button. He didn't have a key. He didn't need one. He pulled out a small, powerful device known as a jiggler, a tool designed to manipulate the pins in a simple tumbler lock. He inserted it, applying precise, vibrating pressure. The mechanism inside the lock tumbled. The light above the elevator door blinked on. With a soft hydraulic hiss, the doors slid open. He and Havoc stepped inside. The doors slid shut, encasing them in a small steel box. He pressed the button for the top floor, marked PH. The elevator began its smooth, silent ascent. They were inside the beast. 60 floors. The ride was unnervingly quiet. Jack stood perfectly still, his senses on high alert, listening to the hum of the cables, feeling the subtle vibrations of the building. Havoc stood at his side, equally still, a statue of coiled muscle and fur. The elevator chimed softly and came to a stop. The doors opened, not into an office, but into a small, sterile foyer. Directly in front of them was a single, massive door of dark, polished wood and steel. The magnetic lock Oracle had mentioned. Jack didn't even try the handle. He turned his attention to the wall. He ran his hand along the drywall, tapping gently, listening. He was searching for the junction box for the security system. He found it behind a generic, framed piece of corporate art. He lifted the painting off its hook. Behind it was a small metal panel. Using a multi-tool from another hidden pocket, he opened the panel. Inside was a nest of wires. It took him only a few seconds to identify the leads for the magnetic lock. He didn't cut them, that would trigger an immediate alarm. Instead, he used a small, specialized clamp to create a bypass, tricking the system into thinking the circuit was still closed. He heard a faint click as the magnetic lock disengaged. He paused, listening. Silence. He turned to Havoc. "Quiet," he whispered. He pushed the heavy door. It swung inward without a sound. They were in. The office was vast and opulent, a temple of corporate greed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city lights, a glittering carpet of diamonds laid out for the master of the universe. The furniture was modern and minimalist, all sharp angles and expensive leather. A massive abstract painting, a chaotic splash of red and black, dominated one wall. It was a sterile, soulless space that screamed of power and wealth. And at the far end of the room, behind a desk the size of a small car, sat Preston Vance. He was on the phone, his back to them. He was laughing, a rich, arrogant sound that filled the cavernous room. Of course he folded, Vance chortled into his headset. They always do. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of official-looking paperwork. These old dinosaurs, they are terrified of authority. Davies might be a moron, but he looks the part. The old man will be out by morning, and the last parcel will be ours. Jack felt a surge of white-hot fury. He was talking about Elias. He didn't move. He waited. He let Vance finish his call, soaking in the man's casual cruelty, letting it fuel the cold fire inside him. "All right, talk to you tomorrow," Vance said, and ended the call. He swiveled his high-back leather chair around, a satisfied sigh escaping his lips. His sigh hitched in his throat. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. He was no longer alone. Standing not 20 feet from his desk was a man. A massive, intimidating figure who had appeared from nowhere, as if conjured from the shadows themselves. And at the man's side sat a German shepherd the size of a wolf, its eyes glowing like embers in the dim light, a low, guttural growl vibrating in its chest. Preston Vance's world, so carefully constructed of power and control, shattered in an instant. Who the hell are you?" Vance stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. "How did you get in here?" Jack didn't answer. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then another. He moved with the unnerving silence of a predator closing in on its prey. The only sound was the menacing growl from Havoc, a sound that promised violence. Vance fumbled for the phone on his desk, his hand trembling. "Security. I'm calling security." "They can't hear you," Jack said, his voice a low, flat rumble that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. "The lines are cut. The alarms are disabled. The elevators are locked down. It's just you and me." He came to a stop on the other side of the massive desk, a dark, imposing silhouette against the glittering city lights. He was close enough now that Vance could see the chilling emptiness in his eyes. The eyes of a man who had nothing to lose. "What do you want?" Vance's voice was high and reedy, all his practiced authority stripped away, leaving only the raw terror of a cornered animal. "Money? Take it. Take whatever you want." "I don't want your money," Jack said. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the polished surface of the desk. The gesture was deceptively casual, but it was filled with coiled menace. "I want to talk about Elias Thorne." The name hung in the air between them. Vance's face, already pale with fear, turned ashen. The blood drained from it, revealing the weak, craven man beneath the expensive suit and the confident veneer. I don't know who that is," he lied, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "He's a sergeant major in the United States Marine Corps," Jack said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "A recipient of the Medal of Honor. And you tried to steal his home. It was a business transaction. Illegal. A legal foreclosure." Vance babbled, sweat beading on his forehead. "He defaulted on his loan. It's all legal." "Legal," Jack repeated the word, his voice dripping with contempt. "You sent a man in a stolen uniform to intimidate an 89-year-old war hero. You preyed on his honor, on his trust. There's nothing legal about that. There's nothing honorable about it." He straightened up. "And then there's the matter of Ghost 5. If Vance had been pale before, he was now translucent. The name hit him with the force of a physical blow. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He knew. He knew everything. "You're after more than just his land," Jack continued, his voice cold and methodical, laying out the facts like a prosecutor delivering a final indictment. "You're using your brother at Army G2 to access classified files. You're buying up land around Fort Kensington. You're trying to get your hands on a 70-year-old military asset that was recovered from Korea. An asset that is still considered a matter of critical national security." Vance could only stare, his mind reeling. This silent, terrifying man knew everything. The carefully constructed walls of his secret operation had been breached and dismantled. How? Vance finally managed to croak. How could you possibly know any of that? Jack gave a cold, thin smile. The Pentagon is in a panic right now. My associate rattled the right cage. Alarms are going off. Networks are being frozen. They are looking for the person who pinged their most classified ghost file. And soon, they'll be looking for the people who were trying to steal it. He let that sink in. He let Vance contemplate the full weight of what was coming for him. Not just a civil lawsuit, but the full, crushing power of the United States military and intelligence apparatus. Treason. Espionage. The words echoed in the silent room. You're finished, Vance, Jack stated simply. The last vestige of Vance's composure snapped. He became a cornered rat, driven by pure panic. With a desperate cry, he lunged sideways, reaching for a concealed button under his desk, a panic alarm, direct line to his private security team. He never made it. Havoc, Jack said, his voice calm. Watch him. In a blur of black and tan fur, Havoc exploded into action. He didn't bark. He didn't bite. He launched himself over the corner of the massive desk, a silent, four-legged missile. He landed on Vance's chest, the force of the impact throwing the man and his expensive chair backward onto the floor with a sickening crash. Vance screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pure terror. The massive dog stood over him, one heavy paw planted firmly on his chest, pinning him to the ground. Havoc's muzzle was inches from Vance's face, his lips peeled back to reveal a set of formidable teeth. A low, constant, terrifying growl emanated from deep in his chest. He wasn't attacking, he was controlling. A perfect, non-lethal takedown. Jack walked calmly around the desk and looked down at the pathetic, whimpering man on the floor. Vance was sobbing, tears and snot running down his face, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. The master of the universe was now just a terrified man, pinned to the floor of his own palace by a ghost from a war he could never understand. The time for talking is over, Jack said, his voice like chipped flint. Now, you're going to fix what you broke. He pulled a chair over and sat down next to the whimpering heap that was Preston Vance. The reckoning had begun. Jack looked down at the trembling man pinned beneath his dog. The air in the opulent office was thick with the smell of Vance's fear. The bravado, the arrogance, it had all been stripped away, leaving only the sniveling coward beneath. Get him off me, Vance pleaded, his voice a wet, gurgling sound. Please, I'll do anything. He stays, Jack commanded. He's my insurance. You'll find he's very persuasive. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, bringing his face closer to Vance's. You are going to undo every bit of damage you have done. And you are going to do it right now. Jack gestured with his head toward the computer on the desk. Get up. Slowly. Get in your chair. You are going to initiate a series of wire transfers. Vance stared at him, uncomprehending. What? Havoc, Jack said softly. Pressure. The dog shifted his weight, pressing his paw harder into Vance's chest. A fresh wave of panic washed over the man's face. Okay. Okay, he shrieked. Good, Jack said. Havoc. Off. Watch. The dog stepped back with fluid grace, but remained poised, a coiled spring of menace, his eyes never leaving Vance. The man scrambled to his feet, gasping for air, and stumbled back into his chair, which was now askew. He righted it, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the arms. My associate has compiled a list, Jack said, pulling out his satellite phone. He read from the screen. We'll start with Elias Thorne. You will transfer the full market value of his property, which my associate has assessed at $300,000, back into his account. Then, you will add another $300,000 for punitive damages, pain, and suffering. Vance stared at him, aghast. $600,000? For that shack? That's insane. Jack's eyes narrowed. Havoc. The dog took a single, silent step forward, and let out a low growl. I'm doing it, Vance yelped, turning to his keyboard with frantic energy. His fingers, slick with sweat, slipped on the keys. He pulled up his private banking portal, his hands trembling as he navigated the layers of security. I need his account information. I have it, Jack said, and read the numbers from his phone. Vance typed in the numbers, his breathing ragged. He initiated the transfer, his face a mask of agony as he watched the numbers drain from his account. There. It's done. It's not done, Jack said, his voice relentless. That was just the first one. My list has 42 names on it. 42 veterans you and your company have systematically defrauded over the last 3 years. You are going to make every single one of them whole. The original value of their assets, plus 100% in punitive damages. My associate is calculating the totals now. Jack's phone chimed. He glanced at it. The total amount comes to $28,450,000. Vance looked like he was going to have a heart attack. 28 million? I can't. A transfer that large will be flagged. My bank. Then you will liquidate assets, Jack said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. You will sell stocks. You will cash out bonds. You will do it now, from this computer. You will continue to do it until every cent is returned. I don't care if it takes all night. We have all night. For the next 3 hours, the only sounds in the penthouse office were the frantic clicking of Vance's keyboard, his ragged breathing, and the occasional, low growl from Havoc whenever the man's pace slowed. Under Jack's cold, watchful eye, Preston Vance was forced to dismantle his own empire, piece by agonizing piece. He sold off shares in tech startups, liquidated positions in hedge funds, and cashed out municipal bonds. With each transaction, a piece of his power, his identity, bled away. Jack watched, his face an unreadable mask. He felt no satisfaction, no joy. This was not vengeance. It was justice. It was balancing the scales. For every family Vance had ruined, for every old soldier he had humiliated, a price was now being paid. While Vance worked, Jack moved around the office. He found a small, hidden safe behind the abstract painting. Vance, under duress, provided the combination. Inside were not stacks of cash, but hard drives. Ledgers. Physical copies of the fraudulent loan agreements. The complete architecture of his criminal enterprise. Jack took it all, placing the drives and papers into a briefcase he found in the closet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity to Vance, the last transfer was complete. The final victim had been repaid. Vance slumped in his chair, a broken, hollowed-out man. He had lost a significant portion of his liquid wealth, but more than that, he had lost his power. He had been dominated, humiliated, and stripped bare. It's done, he whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. Is that it? Can I go? We're not finished, Jack said. He walked over to the desk phone. Who is your contact at Army G2? The one who gave you the intel on Fort Kensington and Ghost 5-inch. Vance shook his head. I can't. He's my brother. He'll be court-martialed, ruined. He chose his side when he decided to commit treason, Jack said flatly. Give me his name and number. Or Havoc will get impatient. With trembling fingers, Vance wrote the name and number on a piece of paper. Major Alan Davies. The brother of the fake lieutenant. The circle was complete. Now, you're going to call him, Jack instructed. You're going to tell him the deal is off. You're going to tell him that you've been compromised, and you're going to advise him to destroy all evidence of your communications. My associate will be recording this call. Vance looked horrified. You're setting him up. He set himself up, Jack corrected. Make the call. Vance dialed the number. The call went to voicemail. Under Jack's cold gaze, Vance left a panicked, rambling message implicating both himself and his brother in the conspiracy. The recording was a perfect, self-contained confession. When it was over, Jack took the briefcase full of evidence. He walked to the vast, floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city. The first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky a pale, bruised purple. What happens now? Vance asked, his voice small. Now, Jack said, turning back to him, you wait. In about 1 hour, an anonymous tip will be made to the FBI's National Security Division. They will be given your name. They will be told about your illegal acquisition of land around Fort Kensington. They will be given this recording of your call to your brother, the Major. They will be told that you are a person of interest in a plot to steal a classified military asset. He patted the briefcase. And in about 2 hours, a package containing all of this evidence will be couriered to the U.S. Attorney's office. You will be arrested. Your brother will be arrested. Your assets will be frozen. Your empire, the one you built on the backs of honorable men, will be gone. Vance stared at him, the full weight of his doom finally settling upon him. You're destroying me. You destroyed yourself, Jack said. I just handed you the bill. He walked to the foyer, Havoc falling into step at his side. He didn't look back at the broken man sitting amidst the ruins of his life. He had no more words for him. Jack paused at the door. One more thing, he said, his voice flat and cold. The man you sent to Elias Thorne's house. Kevin Davies. Tell him that if he ever puts on a uniform he didn't earn again, I will find him. And the next time, I won't be so polite. With that, he and Havoc stepped into the foyer, pulled the heavy door shut, and were gone. They took the service elevator back down to the ground floor. The camera loop had long since expired, but it didn't matter now. They walked out the fire exit and into the alley, melting back into the pre-dawn city. As they walked back to the truck, Jack made 2 calls. The first was the anonymous tip to the FBI. The second was to a secure courier service used by Oracle, arranging for the pickup and delivery of the evidence. Justice had been served. Not the slow, grinding justice of the courts, but the swift, decisive, and absolute justice of the battlefield. The empire of Preston Vance was destroyed. The stolen money was returned. The conspiracy was neutralized. But the mission was not yet complete. There was one more thing to do. He had to go back to the mountain. He had to tell a sergeant major of the United States Marine Corps that his long watch was finally over. The sun was rising over the jagged peaks as Jack's truck rumbled up the final stretch of dirt road to his cabin. The sky was a brilliant, clear blue, washed clean by the coming of the new day. The air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. It felt like a different world from the one he had just left, a world of concrete, glass, and corruption. He parked the truck and got out. Havoc jumped down and immediately began a perimeter check of the cabin, his tail held high, his movements professional and alert. Jack walked up the steps and pushed the door open. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the cabin was still warm. Elias Thorne was awake. He was sitting at the small table, the framed photograph of his platoon in front of him. He looked up as Jack entered, his old eyes searching Jack's face. He saw the exhaustion there, but also a profound stillness, the quiet that comes after a storm. Jack walked over and placed a single piece of paper on the table in front of Elias. It was a printout of the bank transfer confirmation. $600,000 deposited into the account of Elias Thorne. Elias stared at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked at the numbers, then back at Jack. What is this? It's your money, Jack said simply. The value of your home, and a penalty for the trouble he caused you. It's done, Sergeant Major. It's over. Elias picked up the paper, his hand trembling. He stared at the amount, his mind struggling to comprehend it. But how? I had a conversation with Mr. Vance, Jack said. He was convinced to see the error of his ways. He and his associates will not be bothering you, or anyone else, ever again. The authorities are handling it now. The old man's eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. A weight he had been carrying for years, the weight of poverty and shame, seemed to lift from his shoulders. He looked from the paper to Jack, his gaze filled with a deep, abiding respect. He started, his voice thick with emotion. "You brought the thunder." Jack gave a small, weary nod. "It's what we do." He pulled out the other chair and sat down. All of the other veterans he targeted have been repaid as well. 42 of them. Their homes are secure. Elias shook his head in amazement. "One man. You did all that in one night?" "One man and his dog," Jack corrected, glancing over as Havoc padded back inside and lay down by the hearth with a contented sigh. "And a man behind a keyboard 1,000 miles away. The team is smaller than it used to be, but it still works." A new kind of light was dawning in Elias's eyes, a spark of purpose that Jack had not seen before. "This money," he said, tapping the paper. "It's too much. I don't need all this. My house. My honor. That's all I wanted back." He looked at the picture of his platoon, the young, determined faces of the men of Ghost 5. "There are others," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Other veterans out there, like me. Old, alone, being circled by wolves like Vance. They don't have a ghost like you to watch over them." Jack knew what he was saying. He felt the same pull, the same sense of a new mission beginning as the old one ended. The silence he had sought in these mountains was not peace. It was an absence. This was a purpose. "What are you proposing, Sergeant Major?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. "We start something," Elias said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. "A foundation. We use this money, this blood money from Vance, and we use it to fight for them. We provide legal help, financial counseling. We build a network. A fire watch for the old guard. We'll call it the Ghost 5 Foundation." He looked at Jack, his eyes challenging, hopeful. "I'm too old to fight, but I can still run the command post. I know the terrain. But I need a man in the field. I need a warrior." Jack looked at the old Marine, and for the first time in years, he felt the ghosts in his own mind fall silent. They weren't gone, but they were quiet, replaced by the call of a new duty, a new brotherhood. He had come to these mountains seeking an end to his war, but instead, he had found a new one. A righteous war, fought not in foreign deserts, but in the quiet towns and forgotten corners of his own country. He thought of his friend, Marcus, Elias's grandson in spirit if not in blood. He thought of the code they had lived by. Protect the man to your left. Protect the man to your right. The team was just bigger now. A slow smile spread across Jack's face. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes, warming the winter sky within them. "I think I'd like that, Sergeant Major," Jack said. "I think I'd like that very much." 3 months later. The sun was warm on the newly painted porch of Elias Thorne's house. The sagging wood had been replaced, the peeling paint scraped away and covered with a fresh coat of white. The yard was neat, the weeds gone, replaced by newly laid sod that was green and vibrant, even in the late winter sun. The house was no longer a monument to neglect, but a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Elias Thorne sat in a sturdy new rocking chair, a thick blanket across his lap, though the day was warm enough not to need it. He looked 10 years younger. The hollows in his cheeks had filled out, and the light in his eyes was bright and clear. He was on the phone, his voice firm and authoritative. "No, you listen to me," he said into the receiver. "That contract is predatory and illegal under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Tell that banker to expect a call from our legal team. We'll have it voided by noon." He listened for a moment, then a smile touched his lips. "You're welcome, Corporal. Stay safe. And call us if you need anything else. Semper Fi." He hung up the phone and took a sip of the hot coffee from the mug beside him. The Ghost 5 Foundation was a reality. Their small, 2-man and 1-dog operation had grown. With the seed money from Vance's forced restitution and a few well-placed calls from Elias to old contacts in the veteran community, they had established a lean but effective organization. Oracle, from his basement in San Diego, ran their intelligence and cyber operations. A team of pro bono lawyers, all veterans themselves, handled the legal battles. And Jack. Jack was their field agent. Their enforcer. Their ghost. He was leaning against the porch railing, looking out at the quiet street. He was no longer haunted. The restless energy was still there, but it was now channeled, focused. He had a mission. He had a team. He had a purpose that extended beyond mere survival. Havoc lay on the warm porch boards, his head resting on Jack's boot. He let out a soft sigh of contentment, his body relaxed, his watch kept. He too had a pack again. That was the third call this morning, Elias said, a deep satisfaction in his voice. A young Marine back from Afghanistan, a mortgage company trying to foreclose while he was deployed. They thought he was an easy target. They were wrong, Jack said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Thanks to you, Elias said quietly. He looked at the big, quiet man who had saved him. In Jack, he saw the echoes of the best men he had ever known, the silent, capable warriors who asked for nothing and gave everything. You found your new war, son. Jack nodded slowly. I guess I did. He had come down from the mountain. He had left the silence behind, not for the noise of the world, but for the quiet camaraderie of a shared mission. He had found that the best way to silence the ghosts of the past was to fight for the future of others. He looked at Elias, the old warrior, and at Havoc, the loyal soldier. This was his fire team now. This was his brotherhood. The war was not over. It would never be over. There would always be wolves. But now, there was a shield. There was a sword. There were watchmen on the walls. And a ghost who hunted in the shadows, ensuring that the promises made to the nation's warriors would not be forgotten. He had found his peace. Not in silence, but in service.